the irony does not escape me that during the week I am mulling over my lesson throughout the entire week. And of course, being a speech guy, you understand that there's basically three parts of the speech: your introduction, the body of the speech, and then the conclusion. And what's basically really, really important is that first part of the speech. You got to open your speech with an introduction. And so I mull over that introduction, trying to be sure that the introduction is just right. And ironically as it is, the text today is going to start in chapter 14, verse 13. And, I wasn't expecting a call this morning at 5 o'clock from Jimmy saying, I finally got a hold of my phone. Been laying here on the floor, on this tiled floor since 2 o'clock. Couldn't get a hold of my phone. And of course, when I got there, sure enough, his nightstand was scooted over, the lamp was leaning, all the stuff on his nightstand was on the floor. But he finally found his phone to call me at 5 o'clock to come get him and take him to the ER. Of course, I called the ambulance, get him in the ER. But, I would ask for a raising of hands. How many of you love to be woken up 5 o'clock in the morning? It was really hard for me to get my brain functioning at 5 o'clock this morning. I had a tough day yesterday. And anyway, about the time I'm starting to think, wow, I need to get myself organized to get going. And then I start thinking about Galatians 6:9, and do not be weary in well-doing, for in due season you reap when you faint not. And I'm thinking, about the time I'm thinking, poor Jeff, I go to Matthew 14:13, when Jesus heard it. And we've got to put things in their context if we're going to get this right, okay? We need to look at the context. What did he hear? Well, just prior to that, chapter 14, first few verses there, his cousin, John the Baptizer, the Baptist, the Immerser, whatever nomenclature you like to use. He told the truth to a guy in power, and the guy lopped his head off. And of course, the details and everything we could look at another time, probably have already, but the whole point being, they came to Jesus, it says in verse 12, and they told Jesus about what had happened. And when he heard it, it says he departed from there by boat to a deserted place. And wouldn't you imagine a man would want to grieve his cousin? By the way, this is the beginning. If you want to kind of put a dividing line in Matthew to kind of get a sense of the big book, the big picture, this is where it is, because things get ramped up about right here. Things get ugly for people who want the kingdom to show up and are ready for the actual kingdom Jesus was going to deliver for them. Because John was the precursor to that. He was the intro to this kingdom. That was his whole job. And now all of a sudden, he gets his head chopped off because he told the guy, you got no business with that woman you're with. Boy, I'll tell you what, that's where preachers get fired. That's called a moving sermon. You preach that sermon and then you get to move. And so therefore, he told this guy, you got no right to this woman. And that goes over like a lead balloon. And of course, he lost his head over it. And so when Jesus hears this, his cousin has been murdered, basically. He goes out to be by himself. And it says, but when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot. Now, Jesus got in the boat to go across the sea. They have to go around the body of water to get to him. What we're looking at here is the growing crowds. By the way, from this text, and we're also going to look briefly at chapter 15, verse 29 through 39 or so forth down there. We're going to see the parallels between two events that occur. But one of the things I want to let you know is happening is look at the thousands of people who are following Jesus. In a little place like Palestine, that's not something that goes by the wayside. It's not something that doesn't go unnoticed. All of a sudden, there's tons of people following Jesus, and it's almost like, in fact, I put on the column of my Bible, no peace. Bless his heart, Jesus has a cousin die. He goes to a deserted place to try to get a break, and people follow him. They hounding him everywhere he goes. And about the time I think, I sure have been busy lately, I come to this passage right here and say, you know what, you need to buck up, pull your big boy britches up, and just get on with it. Look at how Jesus responds. And I think, to me, this is one of the most impressive things. In fact, it's duplicated in chapter 15. We're going to find that there are similarities between the two that almost, in one case, define the terms for the other incident. It's really neat how that works. And I think God giving us these two examples. Oh, by the way, he gave another example in the Old Testament, but we'll get to that in a minute. But nevertheless, in these two examples, we're finding this is how we need to respond to people who need something, need help. This is how we need to respond. First thing that I notice when I read this is they followed him, and he sees the great multitude, and he says, "Y'all give me a break, will you?" Well, actually, no, that's not the way the text reads. He was moved with compassion for them. Folks, we live in a culture, and I know that the government and things, I don't get up in politics, but I know the government things are shifting now, and it's getting back a little bit to the point where, you know, if you don't work, you shouldn't eat, and that's what the Bible teaches. But we're getting to a point now in our government where we're getting some things back on track. And there's lots of conflict, and there's old people crying that, oh, we're so divided in America. We are divided in America, 90-10. But anyway, the 10's the ones making all the noise. But nevertheless, we're in a situation where we're getting back to a place where people are going back to common sense. We're going back to labor and intensity and production and things that are right and good, and all of a sudden, you know, we're looking at some of these folks that are on that other side of things that are not doing right and good and not working and being paid for doing nothing. And we're going, yeah, they lost their job, good for them. And it's really tough, folks, for us not to be jaded and a little bit cynical and realize to some degree for some folks, this is not necessarily a self-inflicted wound, but let's be honest about it. Don't we have a few self-inflicted wounds that sometimes we can't get over? We need help. That's exactly what Galatians 6:1 says. You know, if you got a brother that's overtaken in a fault, that's the way it starts. You recognize that there are some things where you just get overwhelmed with them and you can't get out by yourself. And so what should we do? Stand back and make a judgment, say, well, you just did this yourself. I'm amazed at how many doctors there are that I didn't know were doctors. Because about the time I have some little physical problem, why? I get all kinds of great medical advice from people who all know exactly what I should have done so that I didn't get to where I am right now. Thank you so much, Captain Obvious. I don't know whether I could have done something different, but that don't help me where I am right now. It's amazing how great we are at advice and how little care we take for ourselves sometimes in applying the advice we give to others. Jesus had compassion on these people. Whether it was self-inflicted or not is not really stated in the text, but I'll guarantee you this. Whether it was or not, when they came to Jesus for help, he had compassion on them. Folks, we live in a culture right now where it's easy to be jaded and cynical, but we ought not to be. As Christians, we ought to be the ones who people can approach and know for a fact they're going to love me no matter where I am, how I got here, what I'm doing, how it's going. They're going to help me be better and get out of this problem, and they're going to help me get back on my feet. You that are spiritual, restore such a one in meekness, humility. Oh, it's so easy to stand up and say, yeah, well, I don't have your problem because I didn't do what you did. Oh, that's so easy to say, but folks, when it comes down to it, Jesus did nothing wrong and spent his entire existence on this planet helping people who had done wrong. He came because we sinned. We got to have compassion when we deal with people. When Jesus gives us an example, by the way, this is the same kind of thing. Now, the incident is a little different if you look over chapter 15. Don't just, we're going to go back and forth, so don't tear your page. But in chapter 15, he's getting out of the situation he's in at the time. It wasn't quite like John dying. But anyway, a great multitude came to him in verse 30, and so the multitude marveled because he was healing everybody. He was doing all this, and so Jesus had compassion on people. He loved them, he cared about them, and when somebody comes to us as Jesus' disciples and says, I'm hurting, I need help, we need to do what we can to help. Now, I'm not saying that we give entitled people who demand something from us something to go on there. I'm not saying we had a guy come by here not too long ago. Some of y'all may remember. I mean, he marched in here and we tried to give him some food, had a woman and a few kids there with him, and Tried to give him some food, didn't want food. Tried to fill his tank with gas, didn't want that. He wanted money. And his comment to me, and boy, this is my witness, his comment to me was, you got a bunch of people in there, go gather up some money for me. I want money. Now, needless to say, he walked away very disappointed because we didn't give him nothing. I'm not talking about helping people who are entitled, who are demanding when they have no right to do so, but you know what? Not everybody's like that. That's, I think, still is the exception to the rule. There are people who really do need help. And they ought to be able to depend on Christians because we are Christ-like. And we have compassion. And all too often, I think we look for excuses not to. In fact, in this particular case, he tells his disciples, hey, this is a deserted place. The disciples tell Jesus, you need to get rid of these guys. Let them go home, get something to eat. And Jesus makes the statement in verse 16, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. Now, I don't know about you, but had I been standing there with my pockets empty, I would be wondering, what does he mean by that? What is he saying? What is the lesson to be learned here in the record that we have? Because it happens twice in the same kind of thing in verse 32 of chapter 15. Jesus called his disciples and said, I have compassion on the multitude because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I don't want to send them away hungry lest they faint on the way. And their disciples, same kind of response. Where are we going to get all this? I want you to know something. These two incidents didn't happen too long apart. And I think one of the reasons we have a duplication, not a duplication, but a record of two events in this instance is so that Jesus and God knows us real well and how forgetful we are. And we learn well by rote learning. That's just over and over and over and over again. And God's thinking, yeah, this is a good lesson. I believe they're not going to get it the first time. Let's tell it again. And so he gives another account because we know from John 20 and 30, 30 and 20, there's a whole lot of 20 and 30. Check that one, okay? It's somewhere in there, 20, 30, and 31. But there's a whole lot of things Jesus did that were not recorded. So here we got two incidents, one with 5,000 plus kids and women, and another with 4,000 plus kids and women, and all kinds of stuff left over from just a few fish and a couple of pieces of bread, and all of a sudden we got all these leftovers, and Jesus is telling them, y'all don't realize the potential you have. In fact, very often it is the case when somebody needs help. Now, I'm not making excuses, but I've got serious health issues of some kind. Many of you know about my lungs and the struggle I have breathing. And I have volunteered my services many times to be a supervisor. Haven't had many takers. I mean, they'd much rather have a guy that can actually pick the box up and move the box. But the whole point being, we ought to be able to do something. In fact is, I think very often is the case we short sheet ourselves, and I'm not going to accuse anybody of being lazy or looking for ways out of helping somebody. But you know what? I've heard some of the best excuses you could ever hear when somebody needs help, and they look around and say, I need help. And it's like turning the light on in a dark room with roaches. Everybody goes every which way. And it ought to be the opposite with us. I believe Jesus is teaching us here, you just don't realize the skill set you have, and you don't realize the power you have with Christ Jesus. Wasn't it Paul that said something of the effect, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me? You know, that works on a personal level. If you've got serious issues with some of your habits or some of your, whatever the problem is for you personally, you can overcome it. With Christ, you can do all things. I think the hardest part for people is convincing them you can do stuff. I was born a singer. I said it before. I was born in a family. If you didn't pop out singing, they threw you in the river and started over. I was born singing. And I've had so many people, when I'm trying to teach them to sing, like I'm going to do here in August, first week on Saturday, try to teach a bunch of guys how to lead singing in a class. And I've heard so many say, oh, I can't sing. Well, you're sure talking real well right now. And you changed your tone 3 times when you told me, I can't sing. Yeah, you can. You know the big problem is convincing somebody they can. Once you've convinced them they can, they shock themselves half the time with what they can actually do. They just look back in awe, wondering, wow, I did that. Yeah, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. There's nothing Jesus has told us to do we cannot do. Now that's a big portion right there we need to swallow. If Jesus tells us we can do something in here in this book, you can do it. Don't be giving me that or yourself. Don't tell yourself, oh, I don't think I can do that. Well, you certainly can't do it when you don't try. And when you try and fail, it's that old Wade, what's his name in basketball, it's not how many times you fall down, it's how many times you get up. You can't ever get good at something you don't work at. And we all know that. Our entire life is filled with failures that we decided, I'm not going to get beat by that. I'm going to master it, whether hair lips the governor or not. And you get to it and you do it until you get good enough at it. I think it's an attitude when it comes to helping. I really do. I think it's an attitude. It's not a matter of we can't do it. Because Jesus said, y'all feed them. He's talking to his disciples and everyone, how in the world are we going to do this? All we have, and that is the one thing humanity has done real good at. We could come up with excuses. We do real good at that. All we've got is just a couple of fish and a loaf of bread here. How are we going to feed all these people? Instead of thinking, I'm with a guy that he's been healing people. He just put legs on guys that don't have legs. He just caused people who didn't have sight to see. People who couldn't hear to hear. And we're worried about a couple of fish and a piece of bread. Let's do it. And that's the attitude we ought to have as Christians. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Can you? That's where we need to be going. And I think that's why this was put in here, at least in part. Jesus is telling them there's no excuse at all ever you can use that's good enough to get out of what Jesus said you can do. And you apply that to things like go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved. Well, why are we not doing that as much as we should? Or maybe you are. You to be commended. We ought to help those who are struggling, those of you who are spiritual. Help those who have issues, those who are overtaken. They can't get out of the problem they're in, Galatians 6:1. And they need us to help them get out of that problem. Where are we? We're back in the back row making excuses, looking for the door? Or are we going to be there for them? If we really love somebody and we really care about them, are we going to find a way to help them out? Jesus did and showed his apostles twice, not just once, twice. And this is not new, by the way. Look back in your Bibles in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 42. This is not a new thing, this deal that Jesus did. In fact, it's ironic to me how many times you find examples in the Old Testament of something happened and Jesus does it because he's God. You see, he can do that. These guys back in the day, this old Elisha, and I'd argue to some degree, he did get the double spirit of Elijah. When Elijah went up into the clouds in a fiery chariot with a bunch of fiery horses and just took off, and Elisha told Elijah, when Elijah said, what do you want from him? Elisha said, I want twice your spirit. Wow, that's a handful. And Elijah told him that. It's going to be a handful. But man, Elisha did some stuff. Fact is, when Elisha was dead, they threw a dead guy on his bones, and the guy popped up and started running around again. This guy was something else. And during the course of this time, in chapter 42, then came a man from Baal Shalisha. See, I should have got Ronnie to read that. He likes these big Hebrew words. But anyway, brought the man of God a bread and first fruits, 20 loaves of barley bread, newly ripened grain in his knapsack. And he said, give it to the people that they may eat. But the servant said, what shall I set this before 100 men? And he said again, give it to the people and they shall eat. For thus says the Lord. The point I'm trying to make in bringing up this Old Testament example of where they gave them to eat and there was some left over, and he set it before them, they ate, and there was left over according to the word of the Lord. When Jesus tells you you can do something, don't use excuses that you can't. You can do things. As a matter of fact, I believe it is a reflection on a much deeper seated issue that maybe we ought to consider. While I'm complaining this morning about getting up at 5 o'clock, Jimmy's been laying on that cold tile floor for 3 hours trying to find his phone to call me. How in the world could I justify, how could I even, think of myself as a decent person when I'm complaining because I got to get up at 5 in the morning to go help my brother. I think sometimes our attitudes reflect a lack of gratitude. You ever wonder why Paul was such a... Man, he was on fire. That fella coming off the road, immediately after he was baptized, did not rush over to Jerusalem to, check with Peter and John, see if everything was... No, he went to preach it immediately. The most prolific writer we have in our New Testament books got stoned, shipwrecked. I mean, he goes through a list of them in 2 Corinthians of things he had to put up with. Why do you reckon he did that? Here's a guy who understood, I don't deserve the love God gave me, the grace he showed me to see that I could work for him. About the time we think we're there, or we're approaching there, maybe we need to eat a big slice of humble pie and sit back and be real grateful that God has done for us what he has. I can't speak for you. I can only look at my own life because I know me. I'm kind of embarrassed about it on occasion, frankly. Don't understand why Jesus would give himself for me. Do you feel that way? Do you feel like you've just been a real good person nearly all your life and you're okay and, Jesus, I'll be proud to own you? I don't. I remember lots of stuff in my life, unfortunately, where I didn't make wise decisions. I'm still enjoying the consequences of some of my poor decisions, frankly. Maybe you are too. But you know what is just astounding in this entire scenario we're looking at is he's feeding people left and right. One of the things he does, this is God, the Son of God that we're talking about here, about to do another miracle on a grand scale. Thousands of people. By the way, we always say it's 5,000 people, but that's not what verse 21 says. It's 5,000 men besides women and children. There's a whole bunch more than 5,000 there. This is a massive crowd in this little country of Palestine, okay? And he's about to feed them. He's been putting legs on people. He's been doing all of this stuff. And so when he gets ready to hand out the food, notice what it says in verse 19. He took the bread, looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave loaves to his disciples. You want a definition of what that means when he said bless? In fact, why we sometimes talk about offering a blessing before the meal. Look over in 15 and look at the definition of this kind of term, what it kind of means when you're about to partake food. Look at verse 36. He took the 7 loaves and the fish and gave thanks. That's what a blessing is. Okay? There are a lot of different terms in the Bible. Blessing has several meanings depending upon its context. But in this context, he gave thanks. This is Jesus, the Son of God, who has been doing miracles left and right. Before he gives the fish to these people, he stopped. He gave thanks. I can only argue that people who are not willing to help others and don't have enough love for them to help them and refuse to see the power they have within themselves to help them, I think it is an expression of ingratitude. Don't mean to stomp on your toes, but I'm just saying that's what it teaches. If we were really thankful to God, there's not a brother or sister in this bunch here who would ever suffer need because somebody would be there for them. Now, I don't know how we lived here. I've been here 3 years. I don't know how this church has worked for all of those so many years, but I'll tell you how it needs to work. This is what the book says, okay? If there's a need, we need to be there. We need to help each other. We need to lift each other up. And I know sometimes it's not well received. Nobody likes to be told they're wrong. I'd ask for a show of hands, but if you're honest, nobody likes to be told they're wrong. But you know what? If you love your brother or your sister, you're going to help them. Not just tell them, half the time, and I don't know why this is that people don't get it, but when I do wrong, 99.9% of the time, I don't have to be told I'm wrong. I know I'm wrong. I need the fix for it. If you haven't got a fix, don't say nothing. I know I'm wrong. I'm working at it. Help me fix it. Because if you really love me, and you realize what we can do through Christ, you can help me be better. As a matter of fact, that's our assembly this morning. That's what it's about. Part of the reason we gather together is to encourage each other. Provoke one another to good works. How do you do that? Well, we encourage each other to be better than who we were yesterday, so that tomorrow, if the Lord gives us a tomorrow, we can go out and teach and show people how much we actually really love them. And you know one of the ways we do that? We love each other. That's how we do that. Not making excuses. We show compassion, and we find ways to show we are so grateful for what God gave to us. You know, when I think about going to heaven and I enjoy the thoughts and the hopes that I have of heaven and what it's going to be like, I encourage people to get themselves ready to go to heaven, because I want to see you there. And folks, I can't speak for you, but I plan on being there. Nothing in this life, as far as I'm concerned, and what I can do, is going to keep me from going to heaven. I want to see you there. And if you don't have the compassion you should for your brothers and sisters in Christ, shame on you. Get it right. If you don't love the world like Jesus did, who gave himself for us, that's the correct usage of John 3:16. God loved the world and gave his Son. He loves us. He cares for us, 2 Peter tells us. 5:9. If you really care about somebody, quit making excuses and go about helping people be who they need to be. Now, of course, that implies that I got my own life right, and that may be a place where we can work some. We need to get our own life right. We always offer an invitation at the end of the lesson, because we don't want you leaving thinking that, it's incomplete. God wants you to be right with God. He wants you to be right with him. Jesus sacrificed himself for it, and the Spirit of the Lord has given us the way to do it. If you know what to do, we always offer the invitation for you to respond. If you don't, ask a Christian here about the hope that is within them, because they will give you an answer. Meekness, fear. If you want to become God's child, if you want to be better, and there's something that the church here can do for you in a public way, then we always offer you that invitation as we stand and we sing.